Welcome to the second of the school's teaching and learning updates, which does exactly what it says on the tin, is to keep you, the parents, informed in terms of teaching and learning, what's going on in the classrooms, what sort of things are your sons doing, what kind of activities they're engaged in, and how can you help them out with that. Just a few housekeeping notes. There's obviously no intention of a fire practice. If the alarm does ring, please the fire exit is at the far back there, or if you're near the fire practice out that way. Okay. We're hoping, hi there, good morning. We're hoping to, as I say, have about 3 presentations, relatively short ones hopefully, and rather than asking questions along the way, we'll have to get that done fairly quickly. We'll then have all the presenters, all the students and staff are sticking around, so that's the main reason I think. And if you want to ask questions, then everybody that you see presented tonight will be here for you to talk to. Okay. Just to remind you, I thought about taking all this out, but I thought looking around the room, there's quite a few new faces here, people who weren't here for the first one. It is available on the school website, and I'm going to make this one available on the website as well. But I thought it was worth just going through. There are some things that just haven't changed, all right? And if you didn't go to the first one, you may not be aware of them, and hopefully to put some of the other presentations in context. Really 2 things we're about as a school, as a high-performing school. We're about really raising standards so that students come out with better outcomes and pushing those standards upwards. Research shows, evidence shows that there are 2 important factors. The first one is parents. I've calculated that students' waking hours, they spend only about 25% in a year. They spend about a quarter of their waking hours in school. And the other 3 quarters with you guys. So any school, as it says there, that's really serious about raising standards, parents have to be involved. Parents have to be informed and taking part in that sort of triangle, if you like. Okay. The other thing is stuff that works. The thinking behind a lot of the work we've done on teaching and learning in the past few years at Ermsted's has been around techniques which have a proven effect on attainment. What I mean by that is things that actually raise standards. I won't go into the stuff about control group testing, which we talked about last time, but in simple terms, if you think, well, I'm going to teach in a different way, I'm going to teach maths to year 9 in a different way, I'm going to do it for a year, and at the end, their maths results are higher than at the beginning of the year, that sounds great, until you discover the class next door, who are just doing ordinary maths, their results went up because they're a year older anyway. All right? The idea of really raising standards is to look for techniques, things that are being done in the classroom around the world, which actually produce a real effect. All right? They actually produce an improvement. You can see the blue group going up there. The important thing is they've gone up more than the green group. Both groups have gone up. Well, presumably the green class have just got older, presumably. Whatever the blue class did, then that's obviously had an effect because it's moved them on, not just to higher scores, it's moved them on to higher scores than a similar class who didn't do whatever type of teaching you're talking about. Okay? The good news is there are actually relatively few. The interesting thing is that some things that have often been taken for granted in teaching, in classrooms, down the years, turn out not to have this evidence. There are only really 3 things which have definite evidence that if you do these things, students learn better, they come out with more skills, they have more knowledge and understanding, and they're listed on the board for you. Okay? I'm not going to talk too much about each one, just very briefly. If you want to find out more about assessment for learning, the last teaching and learning update evening, which you can watch on the website, goes into a lot more detail on this. All right? But they're basically assessment for learning, cognitive acceleration, and mindset or growth mindsets. Very briefly, the idea of assessment for learning, again, does exactly what it says on the tin. Assessment or marking or giving feedback. Hi, come on in. Space down there, I think. It's about giving feedback, which, as it says at the bottom there for some reason, actually improves people's learning. Feedback that actually tells you what to do better, all right? Rather than the traditional 6 out of 10 where you think, okay. But comments, verbal comments, demonstrations, or even things written in books or something like that. Formative feedback is feedback which is actually going to help you to improve. Okay? If you think back through your own lives, think of something that you learnt to do, something that you couldn't do and then you worked at it and then you could. It might be a skill, it might be something from your childhood. Think about something like that. It will have been because you get fairly immediate feedback. You get feedback straight away that isn't just a number, it's something that actually tells you how to improve. Some quite surprising ones, certainly compared to when I was at school. I was thinking back the other day, peer assessment where other students mark my work. self-assessment where I mark my own work. I think when I was at school that was called cheating. But nowadays evidence shows that it's much more meaningful. If students mark each other's work, I have a lot of evidence, as I do a lot of this in my classrooms, that students do it really well. My Year 10 group did it for the first time a few weeks ago. There's a 10-mark question, 24 boys, 240 marks. I took them in and checked them, and I changed 2 marks. And they were working for the GCSE mark scheme, same as the examiner would, and they made, I think, 2 calls that I would have had the other way out of 240. All right? Accuracy is not an issue. Certainly here, I can tell you, the lads are excellent at this, and it really helps them to understand the mark schemes, to understand how their work is going to be marked, to get sort of inside the process. And if we're talking about cold hard exam results, there's no doubt this kind of thing has a real effect. So if you go back 20 years, 30 years maybe, peer assessment, self-assessment, quite an unusual thing. Huge amount of evidence now around the world that it does have a really significant effect on student learning. This little slide I always like. It's from a large American study of revision techniques, and it shows the percentage recall. So reading your notes is a very, very low percentage recall, and as you work up you can see things like marking questions we've just been talking about, marking other people's answers, and designing your own questions is surprisingly difficult. Students find this very difficult. I find this very difficult. It's a really challenging thing, and because of that, I always say to students, it's like putting your brain to 5th gear. Answering a difficult exam question is one thing, but starting with a blank piece of paper and coming up with your own question is actually, I think, sort of one step harder. Okay? So assessment for learning is about assessment, about saying this work is worth these many marks or that many marks, but doing it in a way that's really meaningful to students. And things like peer assessment, self-assessment really do produce significant steps forward. As parents, what that means is you may find students coming home with work that's been marked by other students. It doesn't mean the teacher was away. It means they've been doing examples of peer assessment. And I say the standard peer assessment at school here is very, very good. Students are excellent at it. And as well as students obviously getting the work back immediately, because obviously if everybody marks it, everybody else is, the work's back to them within 2 or 3 minutes rather than next week. The standards of accuracy are very good. It takes a little bit of time, I've found, but after a while lads realise that in a class of 24 they are a team, and actually putting comments in, showing people where they've taken the marks off, actually helps everybody to improve. And also comment-only marking. Again, this is a big surprise. Every piece of work I ever did when I was at school had a number on it, or a grade. Comment-only marking, a lot of evidence suggests that as soon as you put a number, and as I said, you give a set of books back with marks, all the lads want to know is, what mark did you get, what mark did you get, and who's got the highest mark. And the comments that you spend ages writing often get lost. So comment-only marking and peer assessment are things you may be, if you're looking in students' books, that's the kind of thing you may be seeing at home. Okay? Moving on to cognitive acceleration very quickly. Cognitive acceleration is a rather strange technique. It's about making students cleverer. It's about raising the level of complexity which they can deal with. Okay? Now this improves naturally. When students are 2 or 3 years old, they can't deal with particularly complex, long arguments. They keep things very simple, and as they get older and older towards adulthood, these things naturally mature. There are ways, it says on the tin there, of accelerating this cognitive development. Cognitive conflict. This is an interesting idea. Certainly when I first started training as a teacher, the evidence was very much on differentiating work so that students were always given work just at the level they were working at. Evidence suggests that that's not actually the most effective thing. Cognitive conflict, giving students things they can't do. And I think it's a strength, I would say it's a strength of the lads at Ermsteds. They really respond well to this. The idea of a challenge, something they can't see how to do straight away, generally I would say students respond really well to this, and they like the idea of a challenge and they're sort of motivated to try and solve it. Social construction, it was called chatting when I was at school, but actually talking to each other, working in groups, and between them constructing, as a little social group, constructing a solution, working things out as a group of students, and thinking about how they did it. The rather grandly sounding metacognition is all to do with, at the end of the lesson, it's all to do with thinking about how you solve the problem. So that would be a typical cognitive acceleration lesson. You can do it in any subject. It does sound a rather strange thing, but if you start to do it, it affects all subjects. If you can improve the complexity of arguments and the complexity of material that students can deal with, that pays them back in all their subjects. All right? It's quite a tricky one to put into practice in the classroom, but certainly the first one, staff here, we've been spending a lot of time in our teaching and learning time on doing those things, not making sure students are never challenged, making sure they're always challenged. This links to some examples here of things like higher order thinking, a thing called thinking skills, which we're going to be hearing about a bit later on. Basically getting students to think with these sorts of problems, problems that don't have simple solutions, problems that have more than one answer. A very simple example is a very poor question would be what's 2 and 2, what's this for? And a better question, you can immediately make that into a better question, into a more challenging question by saying, can you give me a sum where the answer is 4? Immediately, the onus is put on you. You have to think. You feel your brain going a different direction. It's not just converting the answers to end of. You've got to kind of think outwards. And there's quite a lot of them. There's 5 and minus 1. Got that one? You with me? That's just raise the game. That kind of conflict, that kind of level of higher order thinking, evidence suggests if students do that regularly throughout a lot of their lessons, it accelerates their cognitive development. Okay? To the point, I just put this up all the time, I was supposed to do it anyway, really. I just like this idea. I think we often focus, we've been pushed as a profession to focus on the content, the material, and not so much on the underlying skills, abilities and stuff like that. But if you leave school, maybe go to university or go and get a job somewhere, maybe Skinner's right. It's those sorts of things that you've actually learned which are actually going to be the important things. Okay. The final one is the idea of mindset. A lot of evidence suggests that this is very closely linked to life success. Mindset, the way that you approach problems, the way that you deal with failure, the way you view yourself as a learner, those sort of psychological parameters, there's a huge amount of evidence now building. That is actually a very, very good indicator of your success in life. Academic ability is not. So number of A stars, I'm afraid, number of A stars doesn't actually equate to necessarily getting a great job and being successful in life. The things like mindset do. There are almost no successful people who don't have a positive mindset. It's not a great sentence actually, is it? But you know what I mean. There are 2 kinds of mindset. You might want to have a little look at that and decide which one you are. The fixed mindset is very clear that success is linked to ability. So I'm good at physics, apparently, which means I'm great at physics and I'm rubbish at German and cooking or music or something. It's not something that you can change, hence the fixed mindset. There's also the growth mindset, which doesn't really attach much importance to innate ability, but thinks, well, if I want to be successful at this thing, it's to do with how much effort I put in. Okay? As the description there shows. Okay? The fixed mindset, the interesting thing about these two is there is no link with ability. There are extremely able students who have a fixed mindset, and there are students who struggle academically who have a growth mindset. But the interesting thing is growth mindset correlates very closely with success. Some interesting features up there, and I think as I look around classes, you do see students like this. There are students with fixed minds that don't like challenges the one. So if you're really good at physics, you naturally get the top marks, and you see a problem on the board that you can't do. Well, hang on a minute, my success is linked to my ability and I can't do it, so I'm a bit stuck really. I'll probably just not have a go at that question, because there's nothing I can do about it. Whereas a growth mindset, you would have a go. You would actually try and, as we'll see there, that's the kinds of things we're trying to encourage. Growth mindsets, resilience, those sorts of things. Some of these things have been on the radio recently. These kinds of skills, again linking to the parents' idea, is something which is actually, I think by the time students get here at age 11, they're awfully grown up. A lot of these characteristics and traits and things, particularly things like mindset, may well have been set. Not in stone, everything's obviously changeable, but these things may be developing in the years beforehand. I know the mindsets people are working very closely in North Yorkshire with primary schools, because you're much more likely to influence people's mindsets when they're in those kind of primary school years. Once they get to secondary school, and I must admit, if you look at a New Year 7 class, you can often see growth mindsets, fixed mindsets. Okay. PE department, I know, have done a lot of work on this sort of thing, because obviously you can see parallels with sport and success in sport here, which Mr. Douglas is going to talk about a little bit later on. Okay. Some of you remember this slide from, it's escaped actually, half of it. You've been fiddling with this. There was an arrow going the other way for failure, and when my Photoshop skills improve, I'll turn the arrow round the other way. Success and failure in opposite directions is a fixed mindset approach. There was a thing on the radio there about America making better recovery. Countries like America and Germany are recovering more quickly from the recession. And they were thinking it's partly to do with their business communities, that attitude to failure. Certainly in those countries, failure, if you start a company, it goes a bit wrong, that's seen as a natural part of learning, and that, you know, there's a joke amongst American businessmen that you're not really there until you've had about 4 failed companies and finally got to the successful one. In a lot of European countries, and Britain in particular, that's not the approach. If you've been made bankrupt, a lot of investment people don't really want to talk to you, and the idea that they're in opposite directions. It's a fixed mindset approach to success and failure. If we could turn the arrow around, success is in that direction, so is failure. Success is somewhere the other side of failure. It's not a very common issue in a common attitude necessarily with our education system. It's turning that arrow around which will build successful students at the end, not just in terms of grades, but in their approach to challenging situations. Those are the 3. As I say, I've whizzed through those at top speed. If any of those sound really interesting, on our website we have got things you can download. There's articles on each of them by some of the world's sort of leading people on them, and a bit more explanation on these you can find in our first update evening, which is on our website. Okay.